In October 1983, police officers arrested a drunk driver who had crashed his car in South London. The driver was 25-year-old Ian McLoughlin. McLoughlin was arrested on suspicion of stealing the vehicle and the credit cards found on his person. At the station, he was put in a cell to sober up as inquiries about the origins of the car and the cards began. After a couple of hours, he asked to speak to the custody sergeant and told him, "I've done a bad thing." The bad thing he had done was the brutal murder of 49-year-old Len Delgatty in his North London flat. When police arrived at Delgatty's flat, they found him upside down in a cupboard. His skull had been bashed in 7 times with a hammer, and a towel had been used to strangle him. Investigators said his position in the cupboard meant that his last moments alive were probably spent drowning in his own blood. There were signs of an attempt at a cleanup. In the area where the attack happened, police also noted that the house had been ransacked. McLoughlin was charged with murder. Detective Chief Inspector Peel thought he had a strong case of premeditated murder. The towel used to strangle Delgatty and the hammer showed clear signs of deliberation and premeditation. Peel noted it was a nasty assault, a prolonged one as well. After the initial onslaught, Delgatty wasn't dead. McLoughlin told police that he wanted to stop him from making gurgling sounds, so he strangled him. McLoughlin was born in Lancashire in 1958. He spent much of his youth in care homes, racking up convictions for petty theft and burglary, before becoming a drifter in his early 20s, earning money as a sex worker and sleeping rough when the cash ran out. McLoughlin had an IQ of 140, and he was brimming with charm, but these things were offset by his problem with alcohol. As a result, a brief marriage at 25 collapsed under the strain of heavy drinking and his continued involvement in crime and prostitution. Detectives described McLoughlin and his crimes as impulsive, disorganized, and usually easily detectable, noting that drink frequently played a role. One of the things about McLoughlin that made him particularly dangerous was his bisexuality. He loathed himself for his attraction to men, and in turn, he loathed gay men for the temptation they represented. According to police, McLoughlin's modus operandi was to exchange sexual favors for a place to stay and then steal from his latest host. McLoughlin went on trial for Delgatty's murder in October of 1983 at the Old Bailey, but Delgatty's past crimes would be as much on trial as McLoughlin's. Len Delgatty had minor convictions for crimes of dishonesty, but more importantly, Delgatty had served 2 years for having sex with underage persons. His 1981 trial revealed that Delgatty and his partner had utilized the services of a teenage rent boy network, a network detectives said that McLoughlin was on the fringes of. Investigators believed that McLoughlin and Delgatty had formed an alliance, where McLoughlin would steal items and Delgatty would fence them. At trial, detectives testified that a breakdown in this or some other financial arrangement led to Delgatty's murder. Investigators also testified that they couldn't rule out that there might have been a previous sexual relationship between the two men. When it was his time in the dock, McLoughlin denied being gay or bisexual. He denied any knowledge of teenage boys being exploited for sex work. He denied knowing Delgatty as well. Under cross-examination, he conceded that he and Delgatty were casual acquaintances. As for the evening of the murder, Delgatty had played him an audio tape of sexual fantasies involving underage teenage boys, and this had incensed him so much that he was, for a moment, no longer the master of his mind. He told the court that he had panicked, struck out, and kept striking with the hammer. When asked the whereabouts of the audio tape, he said he had destroyed it. McLoughlin was found guilty of manslaughter, not murder. Detective Chief Inspector Peel said, despite the obvious targeted nature of the murder, he could see in the face of the foreman that, in Peel's words, Delgatty got what he deserved. What Peel is alluding to here is the use of the provocation defense. Like the gay and trans panic defense in the United States, the use of the provocation defense in the United Kingdom was often deployed as a rationale for the murders of LGBTQ+ people. Rooted in common law and codified under Section 3 of the Homicide Act of 1957, the defendant would argue that they had been provoked to a loss of self-control and killed in the heat of the moment. When gay men were the victims of violent crime, often the Crown Prosecution Service wouldn't bother with a jury trial at all, accepting provocation as the mitigating factor, and a plea of manslaughter would be offered to clear the case. The judge in the Delgatty trial was not impressed by McLoughlin or his defense, sentencing him to 13 years in prison. The sentence was later reduced on appeal to 8 years. Through remission, McLoughlin was released in 5 years. In April 1989, now out of custody, he spent the next 17 months drifting around the country, hooking up with older men and stealing from them. In September of 1990, he landed in Brighton, where he met 55-year-old publican Peter Halls. Halls gave McLoughlin a job in one of the bars he managed. The now 32-year-old McLoughlin and Halls began a sexual relationship, if not a romantic relationship. The precise details of their coming together remain unclear. However, we do know how it ended. On Saturday, September 8, 1990, a friend of Halls broke into his flat after not hearing from him and discovered Halls dead on his bed. Crime scene investigators said Halls had been dead for at least 36 hours. Investigators said that McLoughlin had lured Halls into a sex game, and when he was vulnerable, face down on the bed, he stabbed him in the neck. Following his usual routine, McLoughlin then ransacked Hall's flat, stealing bar towels, bottles of champagne, and luggage. He was quickly traced through the luggage to a hotel in King's Cross and arrested. He went on trial in July of 1992, pleading not guilty, hoping to rely once again on the provocation defense. McLoughlin told the court that once on the bed, Halls had told him that he had a fantasy about having sex with underage teenage boys, and McLoughlin was launched into a murderous rage. Police found no evidence that Halls was ever involved in such activity. The Crown argued Hall's murder was a cold-blooded killing. On July 2, 1992, McLoughlin was given a life sentence with a minimum of 25 years. When asked about the conviction, Pam Bean, Hall's sister, said, McLoughlin should never have been released after committing this sort of crime in the first place. This should have been the end of McLoughlin's reign of terror, but sadly, it would have one more tragic chapter. On July 13, 2013, 21 years into his 25-year sentence, McLoughlin was released on temporary license. He traveled nearly 15 miles to the home of 86-year-old Francis Corey Wright in Little Gaddiston. McLoughlin told Corey Wright that he was in desperate need of help. Once he had gained access to the home, he grabbed Corey Wright, demanded to be told where he kept the silver and gold. He then tied Corey Wright to a bed, stuffed family silver and heirlooms into pillowcases, and demanded the man's bank cards and PIN numbers. 66-year-old father of 3 Graham Buck lived 2 doors away from Corey Wright. When he heard screaming for help, he responded. McLoughlin would later tell the court that he was trying to flee Corey Wright's house when he encountered Mr. Buck, who he stabbed in the neck, causing a gaping wound. Mr. Buck managed to stumble back to his home, where he collapsed and died on the lawn, comforted by the family dog. Corey Wright was left with severe injuries but survived the attack. McLoughlin fled the scene with cash and valuables, discarding his bloody clothes and calling a taxi from a nearby business college. McLoughlin went on the run, leading to a nationwide manhunt, with police warning the public that McLoughlin was extremely dangerous. Ports, airports, and transport hubs were all alerted. At 1 a.m. on July 17, 2013, McLoughlin was arrested in London and taken into custody on suspicion of murder and robbery. 3 other people were also arrested on suspicion of assisting him. Interestingly, in custody, McLoughlin dropped the provocation defense even though Corey Wright had been incarcerated on charges of sexually assaulting underage boys. McLoughlin told police he had committed these 2 assaults purely for financial gain. On October 21, 2013, McLoughlin was sentenced to life, with a 40-year minimum term, later receiving a whole life tariff in February 2014. In a 1995 Guardian Weekend article, Detective Chief Inspector Peel, responsible for McLoughlin's arrest in 1983, was asked if he had any greater insight into why the jury in the original murder case didn't convict McLoughlin of murder. He struggled, finally saying, "You've got to remember, it was the early 80s. Attitudes have changed." I would add that in 1983, in addition to a skyrocketing level of assaults against gay men in particular, the United Kingdom was rife with scandals and the flaunting of relationships with underage teens. Tabloids would publish puff pieces about rock stars in love with teenage girls. Papers like The Sun would routinely post provocative spreads of barely legal teenage girls in its papers. But it was the long brewing stereotype of gay men as predatory child molesters that was like touch paper in a courtroom, making it much easier for a jury to put itself in McLoughlin's shoes, giving Len Delgatty what he deserved, agreeing not to punish the perpetrator too harshly. Let me be clear, like many of you, I think crimes against children are some of the worst crimes that people can commit. But the test for the law when it comes to justice is how it works when the victim is not upstanding. For those of you who are not persuaded by that observation, think of this. McLoughlin's ability to move from murder to murder, aided by social prejudice, put him on a collision course with a man most of us would be proud to call our neighbor. Mr. Buck should have looked forward to a long life with his wife, his children, and grandchildren. Instead, he met an unimaginably brutal end by a man who should never have been walking the streets in the first place. For me, the story of Ian McLoughlin is a cautionary tale of what happens when fear overrides thoughtful deliberation, how hate and bigotry can blind us, leaving us all vulnerable to murderous predators. Thanks for joining me. Please subscribe and share.